All right, today we're tackling something pretty wild. We're looking at a text that makes a really radical claim, one that's designed to completely flip how you think about, well, one of the most fundamental ideas in human history. We're going to break down the difference between religion with a capital R and religions, plural. So the source material just drops this bomb on you right out of the gate. All religions are fake, but religion is real. I mean, that sounds like a total contradiction, doesn't it? It's designed to grab your attention for sure. But here's the twist. The text says this isn't the starting point of the argument, it's the destination. So our job today is to walk you through the exact logical path it lays out, step by step, to see how it gets there.
Okay, so to even begin to unpack that quote, we have to get this core distinction down. The source splits things into two buckets. First, you've got religion, singular, with a capital R. It says this is the non-negotiable substrate of any system. Think of it like the basic laws of physics, like gravity. It's just there. Then you have religions, plural, and these are described as constructed, adaptive overlays, basically the specific stories, the rules, the institutions that people build on top of that foundation for a certain time and a certain place.
All right, section 1. Let's really dig into this shocking distinction because it's the core of the whole argument. And to kick things off, the text gives us a really helpful analogy to make it all click.
Okay, so check this out. The analogy is brilliant. It says to think of singular religion, that substrate we talked about, as a society's operating system. Like Windows or iOS. It's the deep, unchangeable code that everything else runs on. And the plural religions? Well, those are like the apps you install on your phone. They're just programs, right? Designed to do a specific job at a specific time within that OS. And the big mistake we all make, according to this text, is that we confuse the app for the entire operating system.
Okay, next section. Now we're going to look at these religions as system hacks. Following that whole OS and apps analogy, the source reframes these religious apps in a really interesting way. It argues they didn't start out as these lofty, divine commands. Nope, they were actually just brilliant system hacks. Super practical solutions to very real-world problems.
All right, let's look at some examples of this, starting with control and revenue. The source claims a lot of what we think of as sacred practices were originally just functional systems. Take marriage, for instance. It suggests that in the Middle Ages, formalizing it as a sacrament wasn't just a holy act, it was also a genius way to create a taxable event and control who inherits what. And what about confession? The argument here is that it served as a powerful information extraction system, a way for a central authority to basically conduct surveillance and keep everyone in line.
And you see this same logic applied to health and the environment. For example, the practice of wearing veils or burqas. The text presents this not as some arbitrary theological command, but as a totally rational adaptation to living in a harsh desert climate. I mean, it protects you from sun, sand, and storms. Makes perfect sense, right? Same thing with pork taboos. Before anyone knew a thing about microbiology or parasites, just telling people don't eat this was an incredibly effective public health measure.
This thinking goes even deeper, right into strategy and stability. It analyzes the institutional stance against contraception, for example, not just as a moral rule, but as a clever, multi-pronged growth strategy. Think about it. You get a demographic advantage, you increase your potential donor base, and you might even keep people more focused on basic survival than on questioning authority. And then there's something like canonization. The process of deciding which holy books are in and which are out. The source calls this information pruning, a way to streamline the message, get rid of contradictions, and protect the power of the hierarchy.
So, to wrap this whole section up, let's be super clear. The argument isn't that these rules were bad or dumb. Actually, it's the exact opposite. They were incredibly functional, really smart solutions for their time. They only become fake, according to this text, when they get frozen as these timeless, absolute commands from God, long after the original problems they were meant to solve have totally changed or just vanished.
All right, so we've spent a bunch of time deconstructing the apps, the plural religions. That brings us back to the really tricky part, the bigger question. What in the world is the operating system? What is this singular religion, this so-called unavoidable substrate?
This chart here does a fantastic job of laying out the difference side by side. The substrate, that's just the raw mechanics of a system. The overlay, that's the story we tell ourselves about those mechanics. The substrate is true because, well, it just can't be any other way. But an overlay is true only because some authority figure says it is. And maybe the most important distinction is the last one. The substrate literally does not care if you believe in it. You can scream that you don't believe in gravity all you want, but if you step off a roof, you're still going to fall. An overlay, on the other hand, needs you to believe. It has to punish disbelief just to keep itself going. And this leads to a really crucial point. The substrate is completely amoral. It's not good or evil. The source presents it as just being like physics. It's not telling you what to do, it's not judging you, and it definitely doesn't need you to believe in it. All it does is set the constraints, the absolute boundaries of what's possible and what's not possible in any given system.
Now, this is where the source actually proposes its own philosophy, something it calls XCT, which is designed to operate only at this substrate level. And look at this comparison it makes. Traditional religions are based on truth by declaration. Someone says it's true. This new idea aims for truth by necessity. It has to be true. Traditional authority comes from belief. This one's authority comes from the constraints of the system. And the consequences? They're not spiritual anymore, like salvation or damnation. They're purely mechanical. Either the system is stable or it collapses.
Okay, so the big question you're probably asking is, how do you even prove something like this? And the answer the text gives is, well, it's pretty interesting. It says the proof isn't some single smoking gun or piece of evidence. The proof is the path you take to get to the conclusion. It calls this a demonstration by traversal.
And this quote really nails that idea down. The title is not an opinion. It is the result of the path. See, the point is that the crazy statement from the very beginning, all religions are fake, but religion is real, it's not something you're supposed to just accept up front. It's the final stop on the journey. It's a conclusion that's only supposed to make sense once you've walked the entire logical path.
And hey, this slide pretty much maps out the exact journey we've been on together in this explainer, right? We started with that really provocative claim. Then step 2, we deconstructed all the plural religions and showed them as these historical system hacks. Step 3, we figured out what this singular religion or substrate actually is. And by doing all that, we arrive at the end, where that initial claim isn't just an opinion anymore. It's presented as the earned logical result of the whole process.
All right, final section. So after all of that, what's the point? Why does any of this actually matter in the real world? What's the big takeaway from what is, let's be honest, a pretty dense philosophical argument?
Well, according to the source, this is where the rubber meets the road. It argues that the fundamental reason we have so much ideological and religious conflict is because we keep making that one core mistake. We confuse the app for the operating system. We take these temporary, context-specific rules, these overlays, and we treat them like they are absolute, non-negotiable, fundamental reality, as if they were the substrate itself.
But if we could learn to separate those two layers, the text argues the implications would be absolutely huge. It could be a way to structurally end religious violence, just by recognizing that the base mechanics of the world aren't moral judgments. It would give us the freedom to change, or even get rid of old rules when they just don't apply anymore. It could stop outdated survival logic from causing harm in our modern world. And ultimately, it could allow us to build systems where truth isn't just what someone believes, but what actually works to create a stable society.
And so, this whole deep dive leaves us with one last really challenging question to think about. I want you to look around at our world today, not just religion, but our politics, our economy, our culture. What are the sacred rules that we all follow without question? And how many of them are we following not because there's some deep fundamental truth, but because they're just leftover outdated solutions to problems that nobody even remembers anymore?